Okay, so the idea is that today we interview Cheryl on what it means to be a source keeper. So I'm doing that for my own learning process. I invited Cheryl and Ria to this process because I am in this investigation of what it means to source keep something, a project or um, any initiative. Hello, Rebecca. So, hmm, so I'm just gonna frame a little bit and then, you know what? Actually, I would like to start by inviting a little check-in in the chat. So if you could write in the chat, um, what is source keeping to you? What are you curious about when you think about source keeping? So that everyone can check in a simple way. Hello, Eric. Hello, John, Charlie. So we're just checking in now in the chat. The invitation is to write in the chat, what are you curious about when it comes to source keeping? So one or two sentences in the chat. Where is your curiosity? So I'm just going to read a few of the inputs. So I'm curious about how to hold my authority, responsiveness, and accountability between myself and the collective. How does it relate with power and power over? How does holding space relate to source keeping? How does one stay open to multiple simultaneous unfolding events? How does one stay connected to the largest whole, balancing direction and open inquiry? The ongoing responsibility and accountability that comes with source keeping. Curious how source keeping and being an elder might overlap. Curious about boundaries and the difference with project and personal. How do I open to source in a way that allows for the fullness of others? Okay. Thank you. All right. So for the interview process, I'm going to, in a moment, ask everyone to be camera off, and I will be focusing on Cheryl and asking my questions to her. And then Ria is going also to jump in and offer her questions. And after that, we will move to a Q&A where anyone can ask questions. And I think I also want to frame by saying that I want to, in my own process, I think my intention is to stay with Cheryl throughout the process and listening to her. Yeah. So how are you, Cheryl? How are you arriving?
I'll try to stay off mute. I think what wants to be named first is I'm noticing there's something about being here with everyone that is almost startling in I feel very vulnerable. I feel very, very kind of in a way that it's interesting. It's almost like my animal body is acclimatizing to that quality of vulnerability. With it was good for me to see everyone's faces and kind of like allow my system to arrive in a way where it's like, oh, I really like all these people. And at the same time, this feels very naked. Feels very, very naked. So yeah, it's kind of like an animal body contraction to that. And then also now that that's named, a desire arising within to just show up and be here with everyone and speak to something that we've been mysteriously alluding to as sourcekeeping. And I've simply been unfolding into my own personal journey through felt and direct experience. So thank you for inviting me into this, Amanda. It's like terrifying and also feels right.
Yeah, I think I also want to say that we are recording this, but if you don't feel comfortable sharing that on YouTube later, it's perfectly fine. And it's funny now that all the cameras are off, I can only see you, so it feels like I'm only with you here. So it's also funny. I know I'm also being watched, so I'm holding that. Yeah, I think I just want to ask some questions as a friend, as like as also someone that really admires you and admires your work. So I want to start by asking, actually, what is sourcekeeping to you?
Ooh, there's there's something very tender arising. I almost feel like crying. I might take a moment just to sourcekeeping. Hmm. Hmm. I think sourcekeeping for me is just it's such a deep act of devotion. It's like it's very, very it's like feeling this way in which my whole body and way of being is in service to and very much like devotional to that which wants to come through. And I find that alignment with what wants to come through has been over the last like 2.5 years since I very much like consciously started to attune to it through the practice of collective presencing. And my story about it is that perhaps before, especially when I was younger, like when I was a young girl, when I was a child, there was already a way in which I felt deeply connected to, yeah, what we might gesture towards when we call it source or spirit or mystery. But yeah, it's like you were kind of enculturated into this idea that being an adult is to kind of sever this very, very intimate relationship with source and this kind of primal life force energy. It's funny to use even words because it's kind of like just shaping something around, yeah, a quality that I deeply feel in my subjective experience as deeply profound. And yet it's like you can write about it, you can write poetry about it, you can work with it, you can actually dance with it and enact through it. But yeah, it's something that it's only been in the last 2-3 years where I felt the embodied reconnection and remembrance to this intimacy with and attunement to source. And the more that I allow myself to kind of like sink into the lived, very, yeah, for me, it's like a very real, phenomenal experience of what that is, even if it challenges like perhaps more secular, rationalist, like empiricist notions of what it means to relate with the invisible and what is in between. Yeah, I think it's part of my character of who I am that now that I've been kind of gifted the experience, it's like I want to approach it with like wonder and curiosity and devotion, but also like rigor and almost like this I can feel like my whole life now is just like this devotional experiment to see through like a living hypothesis. Like, what would it be like if I just completely surrendered to, but like out of an active sovereign choice? It's like made again and again. It's like, what if I just surrendered myself to working to and from this place of deep connection? And then when I say yes, it becomes also like an art. It's like how to do it well, how to do that responsibly, how to, what does it mean to be responsible in my vessel, in like the vessel of my body? How can I take care of my body? How can I take care of bodies? So my body being far more porous and distributed than simply my physical body, but the body that me and you, Amanda, also inhabit as a living field. And to really honor the sacredness of these bodies and the source from which its life force comes from.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. So I'm with your first with your initial response, which was it is an act of devotion. Um, could you like share more or like maybe reveal more of the experience of being devoted and what are you being devoted to? What is what is the object of your devotion? Is there a choice in that? Is it a
Mm.
calling that you receive to be devoted to something that has limits and boundaries, or is it just like how is it this process of choosing to be devoted? Because that's something I notice in my own process, the process of choice to become a vessel to something or not, to open myself or not. So how is that process for you?
Such a it's a question that holds such a, it's like this primal tension between like individual sovereign choice making and also it's like freedom to some extent, and then this like attunement to being part of something much greater, and even in ways that I think very much challenge our current metaphysics of time and causality and choice. It's funny, as I say that, like I would say that Benita Roy in her Stoa presentation, her series on the hollow, I think that was probably my first encounter with what felt like the emerging metaphysics of something that could, it felt much more like it fit like a glove around my felt experience, like still kind of a map, but definitely gesturing more towards like the felt sense and the qualities and like the paradoxes that are present around choice and what it means to choose something that also feels like it's been chosen. And I think the first time that became very much like a conscious choice was when I sat on February 4th, 2022, last year, for my morning meditation. I try to sit for an hour in the morning every day. And I had been practicing and quite committed to soul making Dharma taught by Robert Baeck and Catherine McGee, and was through that quite like devoted to the practice of imaginal meditation, which is like sort of this invitation not simply to meditate through concentration or emptiness or even metta, but it's very much about relating through and with soul and with eros and with this kind of like deep embodied longing towards like the worlds that want to be created through you. So it was already very much like a, I guess, like a present or ready at hand Dharma practice that I deeply resonated with. And it was also interesting, like, I don't think this is just consolating like this, but I was also aware of Otto Scharmer's work and presencing and just this notion. I remember when I was doing my master's research of this idea of becoming present to the future that wants to come through you. And I was like, yeah, that seems cool. Like, it'd be really great to imagine about the future and sense into it and create in my work like scenarios and futures planning. So I kind of held it more in perhaps like a bit of a conceptual framework, but then also with some meditation, with like not some deep meditation practice. And then, yeah, February 4th, 2022, I sat down for meditation and I experienced, I want to pause because there's something there's something precious, almost like I want to draw a sacred circle around what I'm about to share, simply because it feels like an entry into like a sacred space for me. So even in its sharing, it feels important just to almost like draw that temenos line and say like, here we're in a space of kairos. Yeah, so sat down for my morning meditation and felt the quality of a kind of clarity, very, very, very clear. Like, I'd also had been reading about Gene Gebser, but he talks about this notion of like awareing, like this kind of consciousness as something that it's not very dreamlike. Like sometimes imaginal meditation's kind of like dreamy, a little bit misty, almost feels like lucid dreaming, like very magic, mythical structure of consciousness. Like, but this one felt clear. It was as though I was experiencing something that was right in front of me. And the first image that had come through was like my hands in dirt, like in a garden. And I could feel the dirt in my hands and I could smell it. And I knew that I was in Ria's garden in Belgium. And there was something about it where I could feel the vegetation. I could just feel myself in that garden. And like importantly, the qualities of it also felt like it's like I am nourishing and being nourished by lineage and ancestors right now. that's what's happening. I'm like rooting myself into earth. And it just came through. And then the second image was an image of being in this kind of like large loft space. And I knew it was in Berlin. I don't know why. It was just in Berlin, and I was in a loft space, and there were pieces of paper everywhere, and a group of people sitting together in a circle in the middle. And everyone was just making art. We were making art from the middle. And I could, like, it was similar. It was like, I could feel it. I could see it. It was like, we are making art to and from the middle right now. There is like an artist in the middle, and it's in Berlin. And again, just came through with clarity. And it was interesting. There was a third gathering that had come through too, but it came through with far less clarity. It just came through with a sense of, and something will happen in North America this year. Just something, it was something like that. And I remember I finished the meditation and I came out of it, and I could feel like almost this, yeah, it was like the intensity of that, all those images that were enfolded. It almost felt like catching seeds in my mouth and having them planted into my body, and just being like, okay, this is in me now. And the first thing I did was I picked up my phone and I sent a voice message to Nick Shore. We'd been talking about, I'd been involved in creative presencing for leaders with him. We'd been talking about creativity. And I just said, this is what I saw in my meditation. And I know this sounds crazy. Please, like, trust me on this. But there's something in this meditation that feels to be from, it has the quality of the future erupting through the present. And in a way, it feels as though it's already happened. Like it's not coming from a place where I don't know. I remember, like, I still have the voice message. It's like, it just felt like this has already happened. This is in a place that feels eternal. And I have to, and there is a choice. It's like, I have to respond. I could make a choice to not, my sense is I could make a choice to not do it. And at the same time, it felt like the choice was made already. And I still had to say yes. I still had to take a leap of faith. I still needed to say to myself and to the witness, like the very important witness of another, like something happened that feels deeply profound, and something wants to come through whatever is being gifted to me right now. So from that point on, it felt like I was in devotion. Like, it's out of character for me to organize like so suddenly, especially on the other side of a pandemic. Like, there was something like that felt like, really, Cheryl, you're going to try to meet up with a bunch of people that you've met online and gather in Berlin and I remember I also sent a message to Ria. Like, I sent an email to Ria that day and I said, Ria, like, I want to come to your land this summer in Belgium, and I want to apprentice with you. Like, can I just come apprentice with you? And maybe others from the collective presencing field in Europe can join too. And Ria was just like, Nick just reached out to me and he was talking about maybe a CP gathering. And then it was just like, the three of us just started. It just happened. It was like, oh, of course, we're now going to organize a CP gathering in Belgium, and we're going to host it. So easeful. It was like following Wu Wei, like kind of effortless flow. Especially at the beginning, like kind of everything consolidated together. I know, similar for Berlin. I reached out to Nathan, who I had met and just like had become like a brother to me when I was in a 3-month monastic experience the year before. So, and he's based in Berlin. And I knew I had my two co-hosts. I knew my two co-hosts. It was Nathan and Nick. And then I spent the next month and a half meditating every single day on who the people would be that I would invite to Participation Mystique. And it wasn't clear at first. I had to follow source, and it was one person at a time. Yeah. So it's always just been a course of following the edge of something unfolding that has its shape. There's almost like a feeling of, like I'd said it the other day, it's like, I think James Hillman talks about there's like an acorn that has like the oak tree enfolded inside of it. So you see the acorn and there's the seed, but you can feel the potential of the entire tree that will grow from it. And there was some aspect, like there was a quality of, I just have an image of being in Berlin with a bunch of people going into an imaginal seance, and we're going to do collective presencing and make art. And that was it. And I know there's a shape, and I have to be committed to the shape. Even if I don't know what it is in my head, I can't see it, but I can feel it in my body. And that's what I have to stay aligned with all the way through.
Um, mm. So I think I have two questions now, but I'm gonna start with the source point. So you were leading and initiating participation mistake, and you were also co-holding the source point of the collective presencing gathering. And then in participation mistake, there was the artist in the middle, and our devotion as a collective was to the artist in the middle. In a way, we could say that. So how do you like balance the, like as a keeper, do you think you were devoted to the artist in the middle, or were you devoted to something bigger? Like, because I think when making certain choices, is it that you like consult, like you ask you search for advice from source? Is it like that? And then, yeah, how is this process of like then making decisions that you have to make about the structure or the process or whatever you're inviting people in? Like, how is it to decide from source? It's a little bit of a messy question, but because I think maybe I can share my own experience also. Like, when I was in doubt, there were some questions that could help me bring clarity to my decisions in organizing the Brazilian gathering, for example. So I wonder, how is your process when making choices about that will influence the field? Um, yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a nuanced question you're asking. It's been one I've been with for, as you know, I'm in this meta research container. I initiated basically a container of reflection and intersubjective ethnography for the month of March. So we're in it now to really sense into what happened and unfolded in Participation Mystique. And a lot of that has been like me talking to each person, and like sensing into the field, sensing back with source. And a lot of it has like been it's been like a deep internal investigation. Like internal isn't quite the right word because it assumes like a false binary between internal and external. I guess what I mean to say is it's just like there's been like a rigorous phenomenological self-inquiry around how am I making choices, because that's what a source keeper and a host and a human makes. You have to make choices. And I think that's also the difference between simply presencing and kind of sensing and developing that attunement. And then there's making choices from that place of presence and attunement that I sense is like the bridge from circle of presence to circle of creation. So the radical responsibility of making choices out of presence and being very, very honest, like very, very honest with oneself around, are you just saying you're making this choice because it's from source? Or is it really from something else, perhaps a little bit more egoic, sticky? Like I had to be quite rigorous with like noticing subtle patterns that I've enacted for my entire life. And they're so present in me that it's like the water that I swim in. It's how I respond to, it's like everything is baked into my instinctive responses to, for example, like appease. Like I don't like the feeling of tension in fields or with another person. So something that I immediately try to do is kind of find a way to decrease that tension and release it by finding like an easy solution, an easy fix, appeasing. And a lot of that had to be me confronting this something I was very attached to, which is wanting to be seen as nice. Like I want people to like me. So how do when I was interacting with, at first it was like there were 12 of us. So it's like when I was interacting with everyone in the field, how much was I making choices from wanting people to like me, wanting people to trust me, but from like a place of like desiring their validation. Because I think I just want to caveat by saying it's actually very important to be sensitive to feedback. That's actually critical as well. So it's like I do have to care about how others view me and how people respond to me and how the field is, like responding to the choices that I'm making. Mm-hmm. And where I align my integrity with is in all of my sensing as like a host. So someone who is a person who called in 11 other people to commit time, energy, and money to show up to this project and to devote themselves to 6 months. It ended up being 6 months. I didn't know that it was going to be 6 months, but it was 6 months of being in this like weird artistic alchemical container that was not easy. It was quite challenging for a lot of people involved. So how am I responsible to all of those people and their personal alchemical transformative journeys? And I remember Benita Roy, who was an advisor on the project early on, like in our first meeting, we don't even know each other. We didn't know each other that well at that point, but she was like, Cheryl, you're a nice person. That's what she said. She was like, Cheryl, you're a nice person and you're going to have to face that. when you're in this container, because containers of transformation are not nice. They're not nice. And I remember kind of being like, okay, yeah, cool, Bonnie. And then as I was going through it, I was like, oh my God, I did not know what I was getting myself into at all. And I did not know how much I would have to like show up fiercely for especially the points at which it gets shaky and difficult and hard, and to be very, very, again, like rigorously honest with myself. It's like, where am I making these choices from? Is it to appease? Is it to avoid conflict? Is it out of, and this is something else that I do, like I'll take too much responsibility as well. Like, oh, this person's suffering, it's all because of me. I am responsible for this person's suffering. And yeah, it's like the delicacy with which you have to discern, like what is mine, what is yours, what is ours, how do we relate with each other, what is right timing around right relating. Do we need to talk about this now? Does it need this kind of container? Or do we want to create time and space and let that, like, let time and space also be an actor in this relationship? So, yes, like in response to your very nuanced question of how to relate with source, I would say I am always like number one, like always braided, almost like an umbilical cord down my vertical center. It's like I am in relationship with source, and I will practice postures of relating with source through meditation, through journaling, through talking it out with people, through space, through walks. But I know what it feels like. I know what it feels like in my body when I'm aligned. So that's what I always come back to. It's like that quality of inner truth.
Mm.
And that also takes time and practice. Like you don't know at the beginning. You kind of have to make mistakes and cross boundaries that you wouldn't have known they were there. And then you cross them and you're like, ooh, that wasn't right. That was not aligned. I made a mistake. I'm going to look at that and try to not make that mistake again. But then you find center that way, and it does become easier.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, I'm just present with all the paradoxes, the paradoxical nature of
Mm-hmm.
leading from source, and yeah. Um, Let me just check in with myself if I have any other burning questions. I think one last question for now is another paradox that I have experienced also, which is learning about how do we learn to distinguish from this is what I want to do, um, and it is aligned with source. So my desire is in service, and I own what I want, and I name what I want, and I ask for what I want. And people can say no or yes too. So this and both, or being in service of something that wants to be born through me or through us, and just being faithful to the not knowing, and being completely open to what wants to happen, and being empty, and then just allowing for manifestation to happen through me and whoever wants to join me, basically. So, how is your experience of those? Yeah, do you have the same experience of different postures, or how do you feel that? I don't know.
Hmm. Can I ask you to ask the question again?
Yes. So how is it for you to learn the difference from owning your desires and asking for what you want, and just being an empty vessel and inviting people to join you in being an empty vessel also? So how do you learn to make that distinct, if that resonates? Maybe it doesn't.
Yeah, you're asking questions very much at the edge of my learning right now. It's interesting. I would say if you asked me this question like 6 months ago, I would have probably answered more around trusting myself most when I am an empty vessel. And what that means is like from, for example, a meditation posture. Like when I sense in with source through, whether it's through imaginal meditation or, yeah, really, I mean, it's kind of usually like a do nothing meditation space. I empty myself. It's like I first come to a place where it's like, whether I'm kind of in a space of contraction or agitation, or in a place where I'm like porous and more emotional, it's like I just like let that kind of move through. And then at some point, it's like my body kind of takes on this quality of what I call it like mirror mind, or it feels like it's like a dark surface of water. It's like as though nothing is there. And it's from that place of stillness where I know to discern like it's like what begins to ripple on the surface. And then I start following. I start following those ripples. So I have to, like, that's like the place of trustworthy discernment. It's like knowing that I've emptied myself to a point where I feel as though whatever is starting to come through is coming from source. That was like me, I would say 6 months ago. I don't know if this might be like, I don't know, a developmental thing. I'm not really sure, but like now I've been actually it's like trusting my desire more as something that's braided into the what I'll call like the desire of source, and to really trust my like Cheryl's desires, and including like the desires of Cheryl's like animal body, like what makes my heart race, all of that, like what becomes salient in my attentional field. Like there's a reason why something like this is like asking for my attention, whether it's a conflict or maybe it's like I'm just kind of obsessed with this thing right now, and then like letting that be and letting that actually be part of whatever source wants me to work with. And that's actually been like as recent as the last month, like noticing that I can trust. And I don't know, with Participation and Mystique, I've noticed that I'll often say that I'm braided as both source keeper, host, and human. And sometimes it would feel like when I was working on that, when I was working through and with that container, it was like my Sourcekeeper self, my host self, and my human self all had conflicting values and choices and priorities. So sometimes, like, my human self, like, I'll just start with my human, which is frankly the part of me that I kind of repressed the most. It just like wanted to, yeah, at certain points, like run away. It was super tired. She really wanted to be viewed as like vulnerable and human by by the entire group. There was like a time at which it felt like I was just being viewed as like a source keeper and as a host. And there was an image that many people were holding around what that meant and the kind of power and responsibility. And this is all valid. It's like how you should show up. A lot of people held stories and images for that. And there was like a part of me that was very human that was like, I am messy. I make mistakes. Like, I'm tired. I also don't know what's happening. I'm also confused. And I felt like I couldn't show that to anyone because there would be something kind of untrustworthy about that, or people would feel like I was being irresponsible by showing that messiness to them. So I've actually been observing that pattern in me, because in a way that's like a form of holdback. I feel like, yeah, to make it nerdy, it's like that kind of schismogenesis, like these subtle holdbacks around not being fully present, not being fully like alive with whatever is here as something that is speaking through you, through the system. There's a lot of like ugliness that people like that we just want to hide away because it feels like that's not supposed to show up in the field. And doing that deep integration and reconciliation with yourself. Like, obviously, you shouldn't be showing up like completely unfiltered all the time. But I was very much like, I have to be source keeper. Like, I have to be pure. I have to be good. I have to show up this way. And I think that vigilance is something that I'm learning was probably a little bit like too much for me. And I think for others, and I think for the field. So that's like an active learning for me right now. It's like Cheryl's desires are important too.
Thank you. Okay, thank you so much. I will open now for Bria if you're still have space for. Are you good for more questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so
Yes.
Bria, if you have any.
Oh, yeah, you're muted.
I think the question I'm holding at the moment, kind of following on from what you just shared, it's like the importance of the team. Like, of course, we get also triggered as human beings, even if we are a source keeper in a gathering or in a project. The importance of having a hosting team, a co-hosting team with you, that where you actually could show and could say, I don't know what needs to happen. I'm triggered. I'm off track. Can you speak a bit about that, if you want to?
I mean, I just 100% agree with that, like, and would emphasize it 300 times. It's just the people who you choose. It's like, it's like entering a marriage. It's like, who do you want to be parenting your baby with? Who do you want to be caring with you for this household? It's like, it feels honestly that intimate because, and again, I wouldn't have known this, but it's like the energy that comes through these containers, like what you call in, it brings up a lot. in people. It brings up a lot, especially in the Sourcekeeper, because sometimes I picture it like you're connected to source, and like I picture it like a black hole. That's how I pictured it when I was in PM. It's like the closer you are to the edge, like the event horizon, the more kind of like the gravity is so intense, the density, like the way that it brings everything up intensifies. So it was like good for me to have, for example, Nick and Nathan in the orbit, so that it's like it's me very, very tight with that orbit. And then there's another orbit of like the co-host team. And then when I get shaky, it's like I can kind of rely on the co-host team. And then there's like the orbit of the larger field. And then the co-host team also kind of co-regulates with the larger field. So there were points at which like the co-host team got shaky, and then we called in the field to then hold the field with us. So people who weren't like the three of us would also be co-hosting in different team configurations, different crews, especially by the end. Folks really like stepped up and like held the container as hosts. But that was a very difficult transition point. But yeah, I would emphasize like the people who you invite on at the beginning, they're kind of like your ride or die. Yeah, and they are also the people where the most intensity will come through your interpersonal field with these people as well. And it's important to like love each other like the way that you would love a significant partner. And it's like you fight, you see ugly sides of each other, and then you still kind of like stick with each other through it, because there's that deeper, much more enduring quality of love. But yeah, like I don't know, it was so important for me to have like a deep love and relationship with Nick and Nathan through this.
I'm happy to open Amanda to everyone, so maybe I can.
Yes.
Unless you have something else.
So yes, I think we can invite everyone now to open their cameras so we can see everyone again.
And thanks, Cheryl. This was already very great, and we still have 50 minutes to go. So thanks.
Oh boy. I feel more present. It's nice. I feel a little less nervous now. At the beginning, I was like, oh my gosh, what am I in right now?
Yeah.
Yeah, so now it's an open Q&A, questions to Cheryl. Yeah. And if I think we're intending to share this on YouTube, so if you don't want to be, I mean, we can add it also. Let's just keep that in mind. Yeah. Any questions, David?
Like Ria, I'm holding something. I'm not very clear, so I'm just saying that in advance. I want to thank you, Cheryl, for the gestures that flowed through you out of your wording and your search for each word of precise eloquence.
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying that because there was a point where your eyes got wide open. And this question has to do with that. And it has to do with finding and searching for the way forward in relationship to the group. Is it the time now? Do I wait? Do I talk? Be honest, listen. That, when you describe that place, I felt passion coming through you. I'm wondering how playing with passions that come up, they might be emotional passion, anger, or love. They might be physical manifestations. How, as a source keeper in a group endeavor, how play can be useful to explain what I mean by play. You also said when you were young, you had a primordial devotion, primordial devotion. And you moved into adulthood. When you had the vision of putting your hands in Ria's dirt, I felt that youthful play, but I also felt Cheryl's emergent woman sticking her hand in the dirt. So is there a way that play can be used by the source keeper in a group project where passions arise?
I love that question. Yes, play. Honestly, I think every source keeper, and I say every source keeper in the plural because I work from, I would say, kind of like, I'm just going to call it my emerging metaphysics, that every person is a source keeper. Every person has within them their like umbilical cord. It's like you came from source, you came from something, you came from life. So everyone has the capacity to be deeply attuned to what it is that is theirs to usher, like kind of manifest into the world. And I would say every source keeper kind of brings in the field that reflects their particularities and their uniqueness and their expression. So I think that like play is really fun because that's just who I am. Like when I'm relaxed and when I feel like safe and my whole nervous system is relaxed, it's like I am just playing. And I am like that 6-year-old again. And I know that when we came together, when the 10 of us came together in Berlin, and we were in ritual space together for 8 days. So we had done kind of like 2 days in a loft of planning, like figuring out, okay, like what do we need to do in order to like feed ourselves and do kind of like the minimum getting to know each other so that when we're dropped into like a ritual space of collective presence, we're like already somewhat we're like geared up. Basically, we know about each other's emotional bodies. We know what, like, I know what Brandon looks like when he's contracted. He shared that with me. I know what Amanda is in the container for. I know that she has an intention and like certain practices she wants to uphold. So we kind of built in like minimum viable ways of knowing what each person really wanted to like give and receive from the container. But once we dropped in, it was like we were kids. And that's like, I think what a lot of people like felt almost surprised about. Like it felt, there was like moments of seriousness too. Like I think the ritual practices, for example, like, you know, you're entering ritual space and it's almost like you're going into like a very yeah, it's like a different form of play. It's like this is the game we're entering, where everything is like ritual, and we're about to pour water into the same vessel, and this is what it feels like, and oh my God, like the sky's opening up and now it's storming, and it's like, and we're all just super like in it. And then a lot of the time it was just playing, like us kind of rolling around in the grass, jumping into the lake, making food together, getting like way too much junk food. Like we got so much chocolate and gummies, and we were just like eating them. And at one point we were sharing stories with each other, and then like the lights started flickering, and we were like, oh my God, the artist in the middle was making the lights flicker. And we were just having like a really fun time. And I think that childlike playfulness was very, very important for allowing all of us to kind of like just kind of almost shapeshift a little bit through the entire container, so that sometimes, again, you kind of take on the energy where it's like very, very intense. And then sometimes you take on the energy and it's light and playful. And to be able to seamlessly transition through it felt like what an expression of group coherence could actually be. That was like the expression of coherence, this kind of fluidity and play.
Well, thank you for that. The reason I'm thanking you for that is it brought up a memory for me of how I felt when you shared your underwater dream in Belgium. There was a playful vibration about, I know this ain't real, but could it be real? You know, that it's the vibrational foundation that's playful that that I wanted to explore with you. So thank you for that answer, and thank you for today and that smile. I feel.
Something really amazing early on in the collective presencing. One of the questions that Ria asked a long time ago has to do with play. It's like, how do we hold tension in the body? I don't even know if you remember that question, but there's something of that in play, and play as joyful movement, but also play as in laxity in the tether, right? That sense of how tightly or loosely do I hold the tether, the umbilical to source in this exploration. And also something in what you've named about source keeping as something I wrote on my mirrors. Am I willing to experience the pain of being out of attunement with my mission? Right? It's deeply related to your notion about not being nice. Like the place where if I'm not in attunement with my mission, there's a place where I smooth over the pain, and listening to the dissonance that comes up when I'm out of attunement really wakes me up, really dials me in to the membrane of what's mine and what's not, tunes into the proper tension on that tether. Yeah, I'd love to hear you say a little more about that or what comes up.
Yeah, something about that just felt so, I just could feel the resonance of it, and like a little bit of yeah, it's like the body responding with the memory of what it's like when I make choices that are out of alignment. And there is like, it's a subtle, this is the word that's being called forth, but it's like a subtle form of betrayal. It's like, it feels like betraying yourself in a deep, deep way. And yeah, there's just been, I think it's like, in a way, it feels more like I know when I'm in flow by knowing when I'm not in flow. It's like I now can just, I'm so aware of when I'm contracted and kind of like tight around, and also like quick with response. It's like I often want to just like, it's a release of tension, really. It's like a desire to release tension. And I've noticed that there's something, and I don't want to say it's going to be the same for every body and every person, but there's something around, like, a mantra that's present for me is this notion of like staying with the trouble, like being with the tension. It's like Donna Haraway, but it's very much when I'm feeling like a generative tension arise in my body, rather than like find ways to release it, and find a fix. It's like there's something that actually wants to be metabolized in there. It's like there's like something, it's almost like you're generating energy and power inside your vessel. And like by inviting, now it's kind of when I feel like the buildup of tension in my body, and it has like very somatic effects for me. I will feel physically like heat that will lead me to like breakout, for example. Or yeah, it's like there's just so many somatic cues of when I'm exhausted or when I'm just like shaking almost with how much energy is in me. And I have to stay with that tension by almost like folding it back in and like working with it like my body is a vessel, like an alchemical vessel. And there's like, yeah, ways in which I've developed kind of my own practice of, I call it my alchemical meditation. And it's just like breathing fire into different parts of my body. And I won't make choices until I feel like I've kind of alchemized that tension to a point where it's like, oh, now, like I feel relaxed now. Like I feel like something's come through where it's like the instruction that's coming through, whether you might see it from source or from like the depths of my consciousness. It's like, this feels right. Yeah. Thank you.
Cheryl, uh, I was struck by something you said early on when you said that I really didn't know what I was getting into. I really didn't know what I was getting into. How does that inner voice strike you now?
The inner voice speaking, I didn't know what I was getting myself into, or the
Well,
voice that
I don't know who's speaking inside of you. You may have more than one or two or three voices. So I'm open to many manifestations of source and spirit and mystery. So, but that was a voice. Maybe that was the human voice, or maybe that's the voice of innocence. Maybe that's the voice of taking a leap. I don't know. Just I'm interested in how you might experience that now.
Hmm. I don't know why. It's I still I still don't know. What am I in? What am I in right now? What am I into? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. Like I can read fancy philosophy books and follow teachers and journal a bunch and kind of sit here and speak to my experience as best I can, as honestly and as like true to my direct experience. But yeah, it's like I still don't know what I've gotten myself into. And perhaps that it does come from a voice of innocence, like kind of like the voice of innocence. I want to, like, this is something I want to give myself credit for. I feel like I'm now coming at it from like a place of post-tragic innocence. And that's, yeah, it's like a term from Zach Stein, but just like, oh, I've like kind of, at this point, my innocence is like hard-earned because there's perhaps like at the beginning more of like a naivete to it, like, whoa, I'm so excited about this. Like, I don't know what's happening. I just want to leap towards it. And there was almost like this, like a slight reckless abandon, like when you're young and you just like want to go off on adventure. I think now there's kind of enough scar tissue on the body where you're like, oh, like I can do this, but like, let's be a little bit more wise and skillful in the choices that I'm making that impact myself and also the others, like the other people that I invite into this game with me. So I think the innocence is still very present because that's kind of like the place from which there's that wellspring of wonder and joy and mystery and aliveness. And it's like, I don't know what this is. And I'm so attracted to it. And that was like the principle, like there was 3 core principles that I sourced around Participatio Mystique. And the first one was follow eros, follow aliveness. And then there was 2 more, like one was the artist. The second was the artist is the middle. So very much like a knowledge that like whatever comes through the middle between us is the artist. And then the third was transmute it into art. It's like any energy, any tension, any kind of like intensities that feel like you can barely hold it and you want to go somewhere and like fight someone or run away or have sex with someone, who knows, like put it into the art if you can. Like that's the devotional practice. Put the energy, channel it into art and creativity, like what wants to be made. So I think that's, yeah, I don't know what I was getting into, but I'm following Eros.
Thanks for your generosity and your sharing today. And thanks, Amanda, for evoking this as well. Thank you.
I also have a question about bridging the circle of presence into the circle of creation. Maybe you like to talk to that again.
I think it also, some personal context is desired to be shared. I'm a designer. I'm an artist. I'm like a maker. I also love theory. I love philosophy. I love like sitting and talking and kind of like dancing with ideas and imagination. But there is something that feels really, I think Nick at one point said like, it's irresponsible to generate this much energy without putting it somewhere. And I think sometimes I feel that way about potential. It's like there is, I'm using this word lightly, but it's like there can be something kind of masturbatory about it where it's like, oh, we're feeling so much potential right now. And like, oh my gosh, like what's going to happen? Let's just keep talking about it and generating it and generating it. Then it's like at some point, what are we, it wants to become. There is something in the field that's asking for its becoming, and it's asking for its becoming through us. And there's like an edge when you meet its desire in that way. And it's the edge that every person meets when they know they have to meet that threshold of creation. It's no longer about talking about something and dreaming it. It's about like putting yourself out into the world and putting your work out there, and all the risk that, and like existential terror, and like, what if people don't like it, or what if it's stupid, or what if it's dumb, like what if it's not right, what if I cause harm, like all of those questions come up, because like that's when you know it matters enough that you will go through that. It's like painful generative tension and still like put it out into the world. And it's a labor of love. It's like creativity is a labor of love. And I think sometimes there can be this romanticization of creativity, like it just flows through. And I think it does, like there's like points at which it does actually just flow through, and you're just dancing with life and it's really easy and you're like, ooh, cool. Like, I would say that in the context of our current zeitgeist as well, what wants to be created, it's like what wants to be created asks for bravery and courage on a deep level, because we're sort of in this context where people keep talking about the plur crisis and the meta crisis and things collapsing, and like what we know to be true is no longer so true. And what wants to come through is coming through the cracks in a way where it's going to look unfamiliar. It's going to feel strange. Maybe like it's going to challenge kind of like our dispositions of like, does it feel true, like rigorous, or does it feel legit? Like, is this woo? Am I being super new agey right now? Are people going to take me seriously? Am I like going to be considered a heretic for saying stuff like this? So I think there's like something around just the courage it takes to be a creative and an artist during this time, that is being asked for. And I don't think it's being asked for by everyone, but I do wonder, especially in the context of collective presencing in this community, I think that my hypothesis is that the people who are feeling that like build up in their body, like I am being called forth to do something now, and that heat is here, and I want to be wise with it, and I don't want to just like, let it erupt without care. Like, we need to be holding each other through that. We need to be supporting each other, and we need to make mistakes with each other and accidentally burn each other sometimes, and then apologize and do rupture and repair work and try to love each other through like a very messy creative process that is not mine alone. It's like the work of our species. It's planetary. So that's why I commit to the work of Circle of Creation.
Thank you, thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you.
The image you shared from the sea, which is the mirror in the sea, it reminds me on something in the Gene Keys. Are you familiar with that? There's an image very similar to that one, where it's kind of reframed or framing all to the source, which is interesting. Maybe I'm gonna send it to you, and then you can see it. So it seems like in the moment the morphogenetic field is generating images in us on very different levels, and they starting moving to connect on certain points. I'm still interested in the devotional part. It's in our time, it's kind of not so common, we'll say. The traditional religious system have been misused this term quite a lot. And when you use it, I would like to know, how is it connected to the state of bliss or to the state of grace? Is there anything you're receiving around that, or is it kind of a different way? Could be, because I think devotion has its own developmental lines through the centuries as well.
Yes. It's interesting. It's a very, very present paradox that I feel to be living. And I think it's kind of related with kind of like an eruption of, I guess, like a planetary spirituality that looks probably very different from religious devotion of the past. And that is like something I've been very aware of, like the co-presence of what looks like perhaps like devotion or surrender or submission on one side, and then also discernment and sovereignty and choice. And there's something around, it's like we used to see this false binary between like, I'm like giving myself to spirit or church or guru or God. And then there's like now the hyper individualism of our current modernist paradigm, which is like, I'm devoted to myself. I'm devoted to the church of me. I want to like pursue endless growth. And yeah. And I think there's something there's like a, I guess like a different form of devotion that's braided through the co-presence of that awareness that you are self, you are unique, you are individual, and you are also part of a larger whole. And you are deeply interconnected and interrelated with other humans, communities, kin, more than human kin, land, trees, animals, cosmos. And I think that way of being able to connect with one source of devotion where all of that is intertwined, and it comes from within. You don't look outside for it. There's like, and I think that's why the deep connection to source feels very important. I was reflecting on this when I was journaling recently around my experience with Participation Mystique. A significant part of something I've been reclaiming, I would say, has been a desire to believe in something that is like more wonderful, more mysterious, more like something like God and divinity, like this like deep sense of meaning that pervades the world, like love. And I want to be able to have, like, there's been something around it where it's like, I want direct experience with the numinous. I don't want to have it go through like a teacher, even teacherly transmission, like that kind of idea that you have to do it through a guru. I don't like, I'm saying I don't a lot. I guess what I mean to say is I think it's okay for folks who want to participate in that kind of relationship. And yet for me, in my body, there's like something around like that notion of the next Buddha is the Sangha. It's like that's collective presencing as an intersubjective practice allows us each to have our own relationship with the middle. and to know that the middle is constitutive of us. It's made of us, and it's also more, and we can relate to it. It's like transpersonal and also deeply particular and unique. So, and I think that just feels very, I don't know what collective presencing will be in 100 years, but like there's an intimation of something that is perhaps like a relationship with the sacred of the future that we're cultivating in the practice.
I have another question. This one scares me. So I'm going to invite you to you see if it's yours to answer or not.
Oh boy.
And that sense of what have I gotten myself into? There's a feeling of that in me. There's a feeling of like having remained hidden for most of my life, knowing that it's not time for me to speak, and now feeling like, oh, it's finally time for me to speak. And for the habit in my life has been to stay in the background. So to step forward into this feels shocking in some way, and also humbling in a very deep way. But it has to do with the post that Nora Bateson had recently. It starts off with the line, "There is a lurking monster whose familiar diet is measurement and control." And she posted on LinkedIn recently, and there was just like that post hit me in a way.
Can you
And
speak
another
that
friend,
again, David? Because that line.
Nora Bateson wrote an article, the first line of which is, "There is a lurking monster whose familiar diet is measurement and control." And a friend of mine posted something that said, Luco Pacioli was a Franciscan friar who wrote the book on double entry accounting and wrote a 600-page volume about measurement. And it is a lot of what we are bathed in, but it's like the pendulum for me feels like it has swung as far in that direction as it's possible for us to swing and remain healthy and vibrant and connected to the earth. And so part of the question in this source keeping is, do I accept the responsibility of moving the fractal pendulum of our balancing point of this relational connection to Gaia and self? It is the deepest place in me that asks this devotional question.
I want to hold sacred space around what you just shared for a moment. Maybe we can all attune to that. Yeah, thank you for sharing, David. Yeah, I notice. Yeah, it makes me makes me want to cry. But like cry in that way where It's like joy and grief are simultaneous. My feeling, I mean, my sense is there's already present with it your answer. And I notice that what it calls forth in me is, I think it's like the image of that. There's like something that it feels like that to me. It's like there's something that's kind of at this. There's like a fulcrum point. There's like a fulcrum point. And it's like we talk about how we need people to be, it's like we talk about the potential of collective wisdom or intelligence being kind of this like quality of like the way starlings might form murmurations. It's like, can you imagine if we could just like move in flow like that and just like feel into the morphologies that want to like move through us? And I believe in it. And I also, it's like there's there's like a seriousness. This is where the grief comes from, and the joy, which is like there's like a tipping point for something like that. That's how I'm holding it in my body. There's like a tipping point for something like that to really, for that, I don't know, sometimes it feels like it's like a Schrodinger's cat situation where it's like I can feel the superposition of two potential realities, and it's like there's like, and that's the fulcrum point, and it's like which world do we want to choose? Which world are we longing for? And then is your yes and the choices that you're making coming from that reality that you know you want to create in the world? And making that choice it's like what you just described, David. It's like it feels terrifying. And that's why they call it a leap of faith, I think. Yeah, thank you.
I think I have one more question. Do you think we could do you think we could use sourcekeeping as a leadership practice in organizations? And do you think we could learn it in schools? And do you think we could teach it in schools? And yeah, I think I'm also holding curiosity around the bigger vision that is trying to come true. And I think that question comes from that curiosity.
Yes. Yes. I think because we can call it something fancy, source keeping, like, but I think a lot of it, it's interesting. This relates to other work that I'm doing too, around like transition design and policy change, which is like it's like inviting and democratizing the capacity for people to deeply tune into the values that they the values that to them make life worth living, that is like your connection to the fundamental, like, first principles of life. It's like, just like, that's still a fancy way of putting it. It's like trusting your desire. I'm just going to say it that way. It's like trusting your desire, and trusting that there's like ways in which our desires have been distorted and actively distorted in cultures and ideologies and educational systems and political systems and media landscapes. Like, our desires, our sense of what we know, our sense of what is real, our sense of like our connection to our consciousness is like pretty actively distorted by many different interests right now. And I'm like, I'm not one of those people who feel like everyone should meditate and then everything will be good. And I feel like there is like something that is being actively called for, which is the kinds of like systemic affordances that allow people to take the space and time to unlearn and undistort reality for themselves, so that they can come into like a very clear relationship with what is it that they value, what is it that they source, what is that deep desire within them, what is their soul's calling, like whatever you call it. It's like what makes them come alive and what makes life worth living for them. And then to have like a culture, a future civilization. I don't know like how ambitious you want to look at this, but it's like to have whatever future civilization that we're trying to usher in be like of true emergence, like be of true emergence of everyone tuned into their calling, and then simply like living through that arrows kind of like erupting through them in a way that is supported, taught to our kids, taught to young people, taught to all generations. It's like being in connection with your soul. That's what it is. It's like we really, really need supports around that. And yeah, like maybe just to ground it, because you're asking for some grounding in kind of tangible interventions and outcomes. Like, I've been thinking a lot about, for example, like basic income and these policies that we're thinking about to really afford people the ability to not simply focus so much of their attention and consciousness on basic survival needs, and to open up their capacity towards like attunement to how do they want to spend time well, like what is like, again, worthwhile if you're not simply trying to cover rent or put food on the table. And I think the reason why something like that is so difficult to put through is because we don't have the support systems around helping people find the compass towards meaning. It's like, that's why I'm involved with Respond. It's just like, how do people become wise when they're given the time and space potentially to actually attune to what it is that they want to do in the world? How do people find meaning? How do people trust their desires again? So there's like a meta curriculum that's asking to be created, and probably many like place-based schools and like very specific articulations of what that can look like for different people, for different groups, for different geographies, locations. But yes, I'm a believer that this is something that needs to be democratized in the deepest sense.
Thank you. I want to respect everyone's time, so I think we can start closing. Does anyone have any last questions to ask? Phoebe?
Well, I'll just ask a quick question. Sorry, Phoebe, were you about to say something? Go ahead,
Yeah.
Phoebe. Go ahead.
Cheryl, one of the places I was most moved in your sharing was when you were talking about the triad of source keeper, host, and human, and that it was the human that was calling you. And then you talked about post-tragic innocence. And the image I had for that was a woman who having yet another baby, knowing that this baby might grow into trouble, all the challenges ahead, and still resourcing love and innocence. And so I'm not sure exactly what my question is, but there was a lot of talk about finding the flow and finding the desire and what is a sense of what wants to be born, and then but for me what's most interesting is the murkiness, the mud, the how do I hold space for the what isn't clear yet and what isn't aligned yet, and even what's broken. When you were talking about being human, you were talking about the parts that were maybe not quite with the program, that wanted space too. And how do we have space for those parts that are, to me, the growth edge, that places where we can, the chaos, where something new, there's more potential in a way there, and there's more danger there. So I'm not sure what my question is, but it has to do with collectively, how can we become more skilled to hold what's dangerous and what doesn't know itself yet, in a way that maybe it could be at that choice point for, choosing yes, choosing to come forward. So I think I'll end there for my question. It's a big E.
What immediately comes through is something that was in a conversation between myself and Ria and Amanda and a couple of other folks today. Just it's like the gift is in the wound, and how it's like, I remember the first time I heard it, like that phrase, I was like, yeah, the gift is in the wound. And then there's like the living and the choosing to be with the wound when it's burning and painful and not healed, and it's tender and it hurts every time you touch it, and so much in your body just wants to resist being with it because it hurts. And then to still, like, with care and with patience and with tenderness and with gentleness, just simply be with the wound, knowing that already there's a gift. You don't even have to look for it. You don't even really have to look for it. It's there. Yeah. I've had that direct experience over the last, even like 2 weeks, reopening Participessa mystique container. There were wounds from holding that container that before I reopened the meta research container, I was like, I just don't want to go there again. Like it's like, oh, I don't want this. I don't want this. I don't want this. I don't want this. And then I opened it and it was all there. And I just stayed very gentle with myself and just held those parts and loved. And yeah, things, I mean, they're still in process right now. There's no like completion, I guess, in that way, but I think the last thing that just wants to be spoken is when I was describing how in the past I would have been like, I need to be like an empty vessel. I need to be perfect and clean and purified so that whatever wants to move through me can move through so clean. And that just doesn't feel true to me anymore. It's like the reason why whatever's moving through me is just like, it's like part of my being. It's me. Like I'm not just doing something because something else is telling me to do it. It's like Cheryl is doing this too. And Cheryl, with all of her like accumulated patterns and wounds, like intergenerational patterns and wounds, but then also intergenerational and ancestral gifts. It's like I can feel the presence of, I remember during the women's circles, like I could feel like my grandmother, I could feel my aunts, I could feel like the women in my family and the gifts that I'd never recognized in them, like coming through. And it was just like, oh, not everything is just the story of trauma. There's like remarkable like wealths of strength and power and learning and wisdom in the same places often. So yeah, it's very fresh for me and feels very, very, very true.
Thank you. Do you want to ask Eric? Yeah.
Just a quick suggestion, maybe. This has been such a rich wellspring of source coming through and coming up, and maybe others have also been touched here, and maybe there might be some bubblings, maybe Cheryl, you might have some more reflections after the session, and others. It might be nice to have some place where these questions and these sharings can be shared. I don't know how to do that, but if people are open, there could be some kind of pooling. If that comes up, not forcing it, just if something comes up in the next few days or something. Just want to see if people are open to that. And thank you, Cheryl, again. Thanks, Amanda. And thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for this suggestion. I will check with Cheryl and Ria how we can do that. And yeah, I'm actually looking forward to listen everything again and re-listen and go deeper into my own learning. I just thank you everyone. Thank you, Cheryl, for accepting the invitation. Thank you, Ria. Thank you everyone. That was beautiful.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you for